Hello there, Sunnyfung here. I hope you have all been doing well. Yeah, first and foremost, I would like to apologise for the lack of uploads for like my little PC projects and stuff. The reason is because I have been working again, because I've been taken out of furlough and been asked to return to work. That, you know, good times I suppose, but unfortunately means I can't really work on many computer projects. So, yeah, I would like to also thank those who have subscribed and, you know, shown support. You know, the comments that are coming in showing interest in this as well. You know, I've been responding to those where I can. But as I've said, I have got other priorities, including work, which then limits how much time I have to work on computer projects. Anyway, with today's video, I want to talk about computer builds. In this case, if you rewind maybe 2 months or so, I did a video with a build of, you know, a PC in an SGPC K39 V2. And, you know, it was an hour-long video, but it involved me, you know, building inside of it. I don't think anyone's done a video on it, so I thought, you know what, it'd be useful for those who are interested in the PC case, and then they can take what experiences I had directly from building it first time to, you know, make it so they can take things into consideration for what they want to do in their builds. Anyway, what I want to do this time is look at performance. And I do have some charts and whatnot for it, but I also have a bit of a comparison. Because if those who have seen my earlier videos remember, I unboxed a black SGPC K39 V2, but I built in a red one. Yes. If you're thinking that there might be something there, there is. Because I have got two PCs behind me. I have a black one right here. Yep, a black build. These are pretty heavy, I'm not gonna lie. I also have a red build. Yes, two PCs. I decided, because people wanted some figures for performance and whatnot, I thought, you know what, I'll build these two PCs up and I'll put them head to head, because these two PCs have got similar specifications to each other, as you'll see in a moment. They are quite small, and when I go into the presentation side of things, you will understand. So, as you can see here, in my typical format, this is looking at a Intel versus AMD comparison, with one of the builds using an Intel CPU and the other one using an AMD CPU. So as you can see in the photos, for those who haven't seen the videos about this case, for those who haven't heard of this case, yeah, it's absolutely tiny for a computer case that is able to fit in a lot of hardware. In the middle of the two builds is a 500 milliliter bottle of water. Yeah, hopefully that gives you some kind of scale for reference. 4.3 liters is the volume of these cases, so you'll be surprised. It's genuinely surprising how much power you can fit into such a small case. I mean, I've got one of these builds that I put into my backpack occasionally now. So, going into specifications. For those who watched the hour-long build video that I did previously, you will know that I built the red mini PC with an Intel Core i7-9700K. Considering that I had already been planning to do an AMD build, I then deemed that it would be more appropriate to have the AMD system in the red case, because Team Red. Yeah, why not? So that basically meant I took apart the entire Intel system to shift it over, and then did the red system with the AMD side of things. So, as we're going to start from the start, the black build, the CPU and motherboard consists of an Intel Core i7-9700K with the ASRock Z390 Phantom Gaming ITX-ac motherboard. The red build consists of an AMD Ryzen 7 3700X with a Gigabyte B450i AORUS Pro Wi-Fi motherboard. People are going to probably scream and shout and say, oh, but the different leagues of motherboard, etc. It's not going to make that much of a difference, like, honestly. Yeah, that's all I can really say about it. For the RAM, both of them using the same sets of RAM, 32 gigabytes of Corsair Vengeance Pro RGB at 3200 megahertz CL16. Both of the systems have got MSI GeForce RTX 2070 Aero ITX cards in them, which are very rare these days. To come across one of these is very difficult. I had to import mine from China, as some people are already aware if you've watched my previous videos. These have had their heat sinks taken off and the thermal paste replaced with liquid metal. Ultimately, when you've got such a small build with such limited dissipation of hot air, you want the best thermal conduction or thermal dissipation, whatever you want to call it. You want to get as much heat out as possible as your components. So liquid metal has been applied in there. Then you got the Sabrent Rocket 1TB NVMe SSD. This is a PCI-E 3.0 SSD. Wouldn't make any sense to use PCI-E 4.0 anyway, because both these motherboards do not support that. The PSU is the Enhanced ENP7660B, which is a 600 watts 80 plus Platinum Flex ATX power supply, which I had to buy from China. Both of the PSUs have been modified in the fact that the ketchup and mustard cables have been custom sleeved with black PET cable sleeving, and the 40mm exhaust fans on the power supplies have been replaced with Noctua NFA 4X20 fans, I believe. So they're, Noctua fans, they're pretty damn quiet. The CPU coolers, they are basically using the same CPU cooler. It's a Thermalright AXP-90/I full, and the R full. I for Intel, R for AMD. One other thing to note is that the Intel CPU has been delidded, and it has got a custom copper IHS, and it has got liquid metal across all layers. The AMD system hasn't been delidded, and it does use Thermal Grizzly Cryonauts for the thermal interface material. Anyway, going into performance numbers, I thought it'd be a good idea to start with something like Unigine Heaven. In this, mostly everything here has been run at 1080p at maximum settings where possible. If there's any exceptions, I'm sure I'll tell you. So, one thing to note that I'll start off with is that both these systems use the same model of graphics card. However, even though they are the same model of graphics card, I believe there is a small variation in performance. So if they do become a bottleneck, you kind of see it'll be consistent across the board. So the yellow bars are the average scores for the systems. You've got the 3 runs that were run to get your averages as well. I put those in there just for those who wanted to know the information. So the Unigine Heaven Extreme 1080p, the AMD system scores 2627, the Intel system 2651 on average. I do think that is the difference with graphics cards in terms of their binning or quality. Then going on to the next one, Unigine Valley, we have a similar situation here. The AMD system is slightly lower in score than the Intel system, so 4425 against 4440. So when you go to Unigine Superposition, you have a similar situation again, where the AMD system has got a slightly lower score than the Intel system. So the AMD one's at 5120 average, and the Intel one's at 5156.67, so 5157 on average across 3 runs. Following that, I decided to do some tests for Cinebench R20. This is, first of all, we've got the single core runs. And I'm going to be honest, this surprised me quite a bit. So, considering that the Intel CPU, the i7-9700K, has been delidded, it's got a custom copper IHS, it's got liquid metal between the die and the integrated heat spreader, as well as between the integrated heat spreader and the copper heatsink at the top of it, I thought, even though, the thermals should be managed, with it clocking on average at 4.6 gigahertz on all cores when it needs to. When it needs to, it can, because I've effectively got rid of any thermal restrictions. And the AMD system runs at maybe what, 4.1 gigahertz. I honestly thought that the Intel system, the Intel CPU, would be able to score better on single threaded at least compared to the AMD CPU, the Ryzen 7 3700X. Oh, I was wrong, because after 3 runs for each of the systems, the AMD Ryzen 7 3700X in the red system averaged 502 points, and the Intel Core i7 9700K averaged 486 points. Yeah, that was the first shocker. When you go to multi-threaded, this is less shocking, should we say? This I somewhat expected, because the AMD CPU, the 3700X, has got 8 cores and 16 threads. The Intel one has only, with the i7 9700K, has only got 8 core, 8 threads. So on average, after 3 runs, the AMD system is scoring 48.33 on Cinebench R20 multi-thread, whereas the Intel system scores 39.52, 35.92 or 35.93, there or thereabouts. Following that, I did run the full 3D Mark Firestrike benchmark, for Firestrike Extreme in this case. I noticed that the graphics scores were very similar, but then again, there's that small difference once again that we saw with all the Unigine tests, which I'm going to point back to as being the graphics card differences. The differences were quite slight. We're talking maybe 15 to 30 megahertz, but it's enough to make a slight difference. So what I did instead was extrapolate the scores for the physics. Well, I say extrapolate. I just recorded them and decided to show you the scores. So with the physics score on the AMD system, it's averaged 23,469, whereas the Intel one has averaged 18,230.67. Do notice that the Intel system, the score is constant. It's basically the same across all 3 runs. With the AMD system, the first 2 runs stayed basically the same, and the 3rd run was scoring lower. I don't know the exact reason for this. I did run the test back to back, so I would expect that it could be thermals that might be, causing the AMD CPU to clock lower after a couple of runs. I've also had questions from my viewers about gaming benchmarks. So, there are a few games. I don't have many games which have got like built-in benchmarks. So, I did draw out of 3 different games, which they do bring out some interesting results. So the first one here is Shadow of the Tomb Raider. What I found with Shadow of the Tomb Raider is that it is very much GPU bound at 1080p with SMAA, 4 times anti-aliasing, and maximum graphics settings. I don't really know what else to say about it, since the average FPS, you get 1 extra FPS compared to AMD on the Intel system. But as I'm going to say, I'm going to put that down to the slight differences in the GPU bins in this case, even though they are the same model of graphics card. Going forward to a different game, which is more CPU dependent, I suppose you could say, for F1 2019. In this case, it's 1080p, TAA, anti-aliasing, maximum graphics settings around Australia for 1 lap, clear weather. You can see that across the board, that the Intel system is several FPS ahead of AMD. So 4 more in the minimums, the maximum it's about 8 FPS higher, and on average it's around about 5 FPS higher. Not too shocking there, generally speaking. Most people would say that the Intel CPU is better for gaming. With AMD's 3rd gen CPUs using their 4-core CCXs, or two CCXs per die, etc. there might be some issues with latency, etc. on there. The other game that I tested was Bioshock Infinite. I'd say I'm quite surprised by the result of this particular benchmark. I mean, I did 3 runs for all tests, but I basically averaged out all the scores. So with Bioshock Infinite, you can see there are 3 distinct trends. I say trends. You can see some very obvious things that stand out. The first thing is that the Intel system has got a ridiculously high maximum FPS score of 806.95 on average. I honestly can't explain this because over several runs, the scores were consistently ridiculously high. Maybe it's just well optimized for it in that sense, with the numbers that I got being 804.63, 803.73, and 812.48. So that is very consistent. Whereas for the AMD system, for the maximum FPS, I've got an average of 378.23. The thing about the AMD one is that it is a bit less consistent for the maximum FPS. So it's got the results I got for maximum were 412.63, 456.35, and 265.72. Very inconsistent. Another thing you will notice is that for the minimum FPS, that Intel is below AMD. You didn't read that wrong. Your eyes do not deceive you. Intel is behind AMD. So across the 3 runs, Intel was consistently worse than AMD, with the results being 21.26, 20.99, and 21.56. A trend that does continue, though, is that the AMD CPU, even though the overall averages for the minimum frames were higher than that of Intel, the consistency is not exactly there. For I got recordings of 56.62, 45.92, and 69.55. That makes me wonder what on earth is going on. I do not know. Then, for the average FPS, you can see that the AMD system is ahead by roughly 3 FPS on average. The scores across there were consistent. It makes me genuinely think that the AMD CPU for Bioshock Infinite would be better than the Intel one, considering that the AMD system, I believe, has got the slightly inferior, binned die as well for the RTX 2070s in the systems. So this was the biggest shock that I had in terms of testing. I kind of had to rerun a couple of times. I was thinking, first run, thinking, oh, this might be an anomaly. Nope, wasn't the case. So the last thing I want to show you is the thermals. Well, I say thermals. What thermals I got after stress testing the systems. So the AMD system obviously has got the Ryzen 73700X. Intel system has got the Core i7 9700K. When you look at the temperatures, the green bars are for your graphics cards, so it's the RTX 2070s. They've both been applied with liquid metal between the die and the heatsink. They both top out at 78 degrees. The AMD's system's GPU, I think, clocks slightly lower, not by a significant margin. The temperatures when running Prime 95 V29.8 Smart FFT, though, they do tell a story. The AMD Ryzen 73700X ran at 91 degrees after a 15-minute period. The Intel Core i7 9700K ran at 112 degrees after 15 minutes. Bearing in mind that the AMD CPU has got Thermal Grizzly Cryonaut between the CPU itself and the heatsink, whereas the 9700K has been delidded, has had liquid metal applied between all interfaces, and has got a custom CNC machined copper integrated heat spreader. It doesn't tell the full story though either. It doesn't tell the full story. I don't have the numbers on me directly at the moment, but the Intel system was run with a slight undervolt, the AMD one as well. The AMD one was run with a 0.05 volt undervolt. Wait, so minus 0.05 volts. The Intel one was run with minus 0.08 volts. I did try to run a bit lower, but it had stability issues. But when you looked at the power draw being shown by hardware monitor, with the Intel system, the CPU was drawing roughly 200 watts, and when the voltage was not touched, the V-core wasn't touched, it was drawing roughly 230 watts. Using Ryzen Master on the AMD system and running Prime 95, it was showing that the CPU was hitting 110 watts in terms of power usage. So it was using roughly half as much power on the CPU compared to the Intel system. Yeah, I honestly don't know what to say. But the thermals there don't tell you the full story. So what can I say about these systems? I mean, they have got a lot of power in, well, I say they have. I've managed to pack a lot of power in these systems. They are pretty heavy, I'm not going to lie. They can fit in backpacks. They are very good. If I was to make a recommendation now to anyone who's going to build with an SGPC K39 V2 case, I mean, the best graphics card you can still get at the moment is the MSI GeForce RTX 27, the Aero ITX. I've got one in here, and I've got one in here, fortunately. What I will say, though, is that, as, you know, Intel maintained they've got the gaming crown. Looking forward, you know, because the announcements of, the announcements of the NVIDIA 30 series cards, you know, 3080, 3090 have been released, because I use air quotes because you can't get them anywhere. 3070 is going to be releasing later this month. Then again, chances are it'll be released because you might not be able to get it anyway. With that card being a lot smaller, are they going to be able to possibly, you know, make a 3070 Aero ITX or something to fit in a case like this? We don't know. Currently speaking, the RTX 2070 Aero ITX is the best one best GPU you can buy for this case. In terms of CPU, then I am struggling to justify certain things, because the Intel CPU, when under a massive amount of load, is drawing nearly twice as much power as the AMD one. And the motherboard that I used was cheaper on AMD one than it was on the Intel one. That makes you wonder. And with Ryzen 5000 series CPUs also having been announced in the past couple of days, they are supposed to have better gaming performance and multi-core performance again compared to Intel. You know, okay, the prices might go up a little bit, but they have, you know, started hammering those nails into Intel's coffin, unless Intel can do something. So, in my honest opinion, for this case, AMD would be the smart way to go. The Ryzen 7 3700X performs amazing in this case compared to the Intel Core i7 9700K. It draws less power than the Intel equivalents. I guess that also helps people who are trying to build these systems, because to get a high-powered Flex ATX power supply is not easy either. The only gripe I do have about the AMD system over the Intel system is regarding fan hysteresis, whereby the Intel core temperatures, you know, if you run a hardware monitor, it will look at each individual core temperature, and there'll also be a package temperature. and the fans ramp up and ramp down based on that package temperature. So if one core gets a bit warmer and all the other cores don't, and the package temperature doesn't change much, you don't really have much in terms of fan noise. The issue with the AMD one is you don't have that sort of luxury. It just works off a single, I guess, thermostat, something that picks up temperature in this case. And in that sense, you know, you put a small load in it, and it will then cause the temperature to rise quite quickly from what it's sensing. And then you have this issue of fan hysteresis, where the fan ramps up, ramps down, ramps up, ramps down. It's far more obvious with the AMD system than it is on the Intel one. But other than that, I would choose AMD any day of the week, because once you're running your system full tilt, under load, gaming, whatnot, it doesn't matter what the fan hysteresis is like, because you'll just get used to the fan noise anyway after a couple of minutes of hearing it blowing hard. That's all I have to say here. I hope you guys found this video useful and informative. Hopefully you guys will give me some information in terms of what you guys have made with these cases. They are actually really good cases. I highly recommend them for those who are constrained with regards to space. And yeah, thank you very much for watching. If you haven't already, please subscribe. And I do stream on Twitch every day as well, so if anybody wants to pop by, please find me on there as well. Thank you very much for watching. Take care.